The door swung open, and there she stood, clutching a white towel, water droplets on her collarbone. "Wrong house?" she asked, more amused than alarmed. "Hello, I'm Marcus. I'm 28, freelance graphic designer, and I've always been the guy who thinks before speaking. The one who notices details like how someone's laugh can transform their entire face. I grew up here in the suburbs, played it safe my whole life. Never made waves, never took risks. But something about her green eyes, the way she didn't immediately slam the door, made me reckless. Looks right to me, I heard myself say. She laughed, genuine surprise that made years fall away from her face. I should have apologized for the mix-up, found Brian's actual house 2 doors down. Instead, I stood there while she decided whether to close the door or invite chaos inside. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Checked the house number again. 427 Maple Street. This had to be it. Brian's text said he'd finally finished moving in, and a few of us from basketball were supposed to drop by to see the new place. But his beat-up Honda was nowhere in sight, just a silver sedan parked in the driveway, catching the late afternoon sun. Maybe he was inside. I walked up to the door, noting the well-tended flower boxes beneath the windows. Not really Brian's style, but, who knows, maybe suburban life was changing him. The doorbell had one of those decorative covers with vines etched into the brass. Definitely not Brian's taste. Still, I pressed it and waited. Footsteps approached from inside, light and quick on what sounded like hardwood floors. The door opened, and my rehearsed greeting died in my throat. A woman stood there, wrapped in nothing but a white bath towel. Her auburn hair was dark with water, scattered droplets trailing down her neck to her collarbone. She had to be in her early 40s, but something in her face, a kind of gentle warmth, made age seem completely irrelevant. Her free hand clutched the towel where it tucked against her chest, and I noticed her toenails were painted a soft pink against the dark wood of the threshold. "Can I help you?" she asked, amusement dancing in her eyes, green eyes, I noticed, bright and engaging. "You look a bit lost." I should have apologized immediately. Should have backed away with embarrassed mumbles about wrong addresses and mixed-up numbers. That's what any normal person would have done when confronted with a practically naked stranger, whose bath they'd just interrupted. Instead, I found myself saying, "No, this looks right to me." The words came out before I could stop them, carried on a smile I couldn't quite control. She laughed then, not an awkward or uncomfortable sound, but something genuine and surprised that transformed her whole face. The years seemed to fall away, as her eyes crinkled at the corners, and I found myself laughing too, caught up in the absurdity of the moment. "Does it now?" she asked, making no move to close the door. Water dripped steadily from her hair onto her shoulders, but she didn't seem to mind. "And what exactly were you looking for?" "My friend Brian's new place," I admitted. "He just moved to Maple Street." 427, he said. "Ah," she nodded, still smiling. "That would be 429, next door. They just finished moving in. Last weekend I saw the moving truck." I should have thanked her and left. Should have felt mortified about the whole situation. But something held me there. Something in the way she looked at me, direct but soft, like we were sharing a private joke. The late afternoon light caught in her damp hair, turning it to copper, and neither of us seemed in any hurry to break this strange spell that had settled over us. Time felt suspended in that moment. Me on her porch, her in her towel, both of us caught in this unexpected pocket of connection that made no logical sense, but felt somehow right. A water droplet traced its way down her neck, and I watched its path before catching myself and bringing my eyes back to hers. "I'm Marcus," I said softly, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever this was. "Sophia," she replied, her voice equally gentle. The towel shifted slightly as she adjusted her grip, and I saw the hint of a freckle on her shoulder. A car door slammed somewhere down the street. Breaking into our bubble of quiet, we both startled slightly, and I watched color rise in her cheeks as reality seemed to seep back in. She glanced down at herself, then back at me, but still didn't close the door. I should probably let you get back to your bath, I said, though everything in me wanted to stay right there on her porch, keeping this moment alive. I'm Sophia, she said, shifting the towel slightly. And you are, Marcus. Sorry about, I gestured vaguely at her state of undress, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. Oh, this. She glanced down at herself with a small laugh. Just my usual Saturday afternoon attire. Her eyes sparkled with humor. You mentioned Brian, and the wrong address. Yeah, here. I pulled out my phone, showing her Brian's text. He said 427, but you mentioned 429. She leaned forward slightly to see the screen, a few drops of water falling from her hair onto my phone. Sorry, she murmured, but I barely heard her. The scent of her shampoo, something floral and warm, drifted between us. Listen, she said, straightening up. Why don't you come in for a moment while I get dressed? I'd hate for the whole neighborhood to think we're all crazy towel people on this street. She stepped back from the doorway. Gesturing me inside, I followed her into a living room that immediately told me I'd definitely come to the wrong house. Where Brian's place would have been all gaming chairs and basketball posters, this room held real art on the walls, not prints, but original paintings. Bookshelves lined one wall, packed with well-worn volumes. A violin case sat in the corner next to a music stand. Make yourself comfortable, Sophia called over her shoulder as she disappeared down a hallway. I'll just be a minute. I settled onto the edge of her sofa, taking in more details. Family photos showed a younger girl at various ages, probably her daughter. The coffee table held a stack of architecture magazines and a half-finished mug of tea. True to her word. Sophia returned quickly, now wearing faded jeans and an oversized cream sweater that slipped off one shoulder. Her hair was still damp, darker, auburn against the pale knit eye. Feel like I owe you coffee, she said, heading toward what I assumed was the kitchen. You know, as an apology for the unconventional welcome. You don't owe me anything, I said, but I followed her anyway. The kitchen was bright and open, with a large island in the center. She gestured for me to take one of the bar stools while she moved around the space with familiar ease. French press, okay, she asked, measuring coffee beans into a grinder. Perfect. I watched her efficient movements, the way she seemed completely at ease, despite our strange introduction. So you said you've seen Brian moving in next door? Yes, just last weekend. She poured hot water over the grounds in a careful spiral. I'm still pretty new myself, only moved in 3 weeks ago. She set 2 mugs on the island and leaned against the counter while we waited for the coffee to steep. Fresh start, I asked, then wondered if that was too personal, but Sophia just nodded, a slight shadow crossing her face. Very fresh. Recently divorced, my daughter's away at college now, so it seemed like the right time to. She waved her hand at the space around us, downsize, start over. She pressed down the plunger on the French press. Though starting over at 45 wasn't exactly in my original life plan. She caught herself after saying the number, something flickering across her expression, as if she hadn't meant to reveal her age. But before any awkwardness could settle in, she was pouring the coffee into our mugs. Milk, sugar, she offered. Just black is fine. We settled into an surprisingly comfortable conversation, considering how we'd met. She told me about her daughter's pre-med program, about choosing this neighborhood for its quiet streets and proximity to downtown. I shared stories about my pickup basketball group with Brian Bell, my work in software development. The late afternoon light slanted through her kitchen windows, casting warm shadows across the island between us. Her hair was starting to dry, in soft waves, and every so often she'd absently tuck a strand behind her ear. Despite the strange circumstances of our meeting, or maybe because of them, the conversation flowed naturally, no pretense, no careful social dancing, just 2 people sharing coffee and stories while the day softened toward evening. The quiet settled between us for a moment, and I found myself wanting to keep the conversation going. I just turned 28 last month, actually. I watched as Sophia processed this information, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. The 17-year gap between us hung in the air, but instead of awkwardness, a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. You know what else is 28? She gestured toward her counter. That coffee maker. Both of you in your prime. Her green eyes crinkled with genuine amusement. Though I think you probably work a bit more reliably. I laughed, grateful for how she'd diffused any tension. I don't know, I've crashed a few times myself, usually after too much coffee. Well, then we're definitely not making you another cup, she said, settling more comfortably on her bar stool. I'd hate to be responsible for any system malfunctions. The conversation flowed effortlessly after that, winding through topics like tributary streams, joining a river. Sophia told me about her work as an architectural consultant, how she loved helping people reimagine spaces. I shared stories about my latest coding project, and she actually asked intelligent questions instead of glazing over like most people did. Sunlight shifted across her kitchen floor as we talked, the afternoon settling into that golden hour when everything looks softer, more intimate. I found myself noticing small details about her. The way she used her hands when she spoke about something passionate, the slight tilt of her head when she was really listening. How her laugh seemed to start in her eyes before it reached her mouth. When I glanced at my phone and realized an hour had passed, it felt impossible. I should probably go track down Brian's actual house, I said, though I felt oddly reluctant to leave this unexpected encounter. Probably better than knocking on random doors hoping to find more people in towels, she teased, standing up to walk me out. At her front door, Sophia paused. Brian's lucky, you know. Her hand touched my arm briefly, just a light pressure through my shirt sleeve, but it felt significant somehow. To have a friend who gets lost in such interesting ways. The warmth of that small contact lingered as I walked to my car, aware that something had shifted in the universe. This wrong turn. This accident of numbers 427, instead of 429, had opened up some kind of possibility I hadn't known to look for. I sat in my car for a moment, looking back at her house. The silver sedan made sense now, as did the violin case and the well-worn books. Everything about Sophia made sense, except for how natural it had felt to sit in her kitchen and talk away an afternoon. I found myself wondering if I'd find another reason to visit Maple Street, even as I knew I probably shouldn't. Through her front window, I could see her moving through her living room, probably clearing away our coffee mugs. She paused for a moment, and I quickly started my car, not wanting to be caught staring like some lovesick teenager, which I wasn't. I was 28, as I'd pointed out earlier, fully adult, with a career and a life of my own. So why did I feel like I'd just stumbled into the beginning of something that could complicate everything? I spent 2 days trying not to think about Sophia. 2 days where every auburn-haired woman in a coffee shop made my heart skip, where every silver sedan on the road drew my attention. I told myself it was natural to be intrigued by an unexpected connection. Natural, but not necessarily wise. Yet here I was on Monday afternoon, walking down Maple Street like some love-struck teenager. I'd convinced myself I was just taking the scenic route home from the office, though my apartment was decidedly not in this direction. The late September sun warmed my face as maple leaves drifted onto perfectly manicured lawns. 427 came into view, and I slowed my pace, telling myself I wouldn't actually stop. Are you lost again? Sophia's voice carried from her front porch, warm with amusement. She stood there holding several paint sample cards, wearing faded jeans and an old university sweatshirt that somehow made her look younger. Her smile suggested she knew exactly why I was here, and I felt my face flush. Just passing through, I managed, though we both knew that was a lie. Well, since you're here, she waved the paint samples. I could use a second opinion on dining room colors. Unless you have somewhere else to be. I didn't even try to pretend I did. I'm pretty good with colors, actually. Of course you are, she laughed, holding the door open. Come on in before the neighbors start wondering why you're lurking on my sidewalk. Her dining room was bright with afternoon light, empty except for a drop cloth spread across the hardwood floor. Paint swatches dotted one wall like some abstract art installation. I'm torn between autumn wheat and golden hour, she said, holding up to nearly identical samples. Though honestly, they all start looking the same after a while. We spent the next hour testing different swatches, stepping back to consider them in various lights. Debating the subtle differences between warm and cool neutrals, the conversation flowed naturally from there. She told me about a bathroom renovation disaster in her old house, which led to stories about career changes and life pivots. I actually wanted to be a violinist, she said, gesturing toward the case I'd noticed during my first visit. Played all through college. Now it's just for fun when I need to clear my head. What do you play when no one's listening? I asked, reaching around her to tape up another sample. Tom Waits, usually transformed into sadly amateur violin solos. She laughed, then added, don't judge. Only if you don't judge my secret Taylor Swift shower concerts. Our eyes met, and something shifted in the air between us. We were standing, close to close probably, and I could smell her shampoo, something citrusy and fresh. She looked away first. Reaching for another paint sample, our hands brushed as we both grabbed for the same paint can, and I felt that small contact like an electric current. These moments kept happening, little accidents of proximity that felt anything but accidental. Every time we had to maneuver around each other in the small space, every shared laugh over particularly awful color names, contemplative mushroom was a real option. It all felt charged with something we weren't naming. The afternoon light began to shift, painting her walls in shades of gold that put all our samples to shame. Sophia stepped back, considering the wall of colors we'd created. I think we've earned a break, she said, turning to face me. Unless you're still convinced you were just passing through. There was a gentle challenge in her voice, an invitation to be honest about why I was really here. The setting sun caught in her hair, turning it to fire, and I realized I was tired of pretending this was all coincidence. Inside, Sophia headed straight for a wine rack tucked beneath her kitchen counter. I believe in paying my consultants properly, she said, pulling out a bottle of red. Though I should warn you, my wine knowledge stops at, I like this one. That's usually all the knowledge you need, I replied, watching her gather 2 glasses. The domesticity of the moment struck me, how natural it felt to be standing in her kitchen at sunset, like we'd done this 100 times before. Let's take this outside, she suggested. The back porch is the best spot in the house this time of day. Her back porch was a covered sanctuary, complete with potted plants and a wooden swing that could easily seat to string lights crisscrossed overhead, though they weren't lit yet in the fading daylight. We settled onto the swing, leaving a respectable space between us. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn crispness. Sophia poured the wine, handed me a glass. 2 color consultations, she toasted with a smile. And wrong turns that turn out right. The wine was good, rich and warming. The swing moved gently as we talked, our earlier easy conversation flowing into deeper waters as twilight settled around us. That space between us seemed to shrink with each passing story, each shared laugh, until our shoulders were nearly touching. You know what's strange? Sophia said after a quiet moment, swirling the last of her wine. I used to think 40 was ancient. Now I'm 45 and I feel. She paused, searching for words. I feel exactly like myself, just with better perspective. But the world sees you differently after 40. Especially as a woman. I turned toward her, struck by the vulnerability in her voice. The string lights had clicked on automatically, casting soft shadows across her face. Men used to notice me, she continued softly. Not that I wanted their attention, necessarily. But now they look through me, instead of at me. Like I've become invisible. She gave a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Sorry, that sounds terribly self-pitying, doesn't it? No, I said. It sounds honest. She met my gaze then, something uncertain flickering across her face. The swing creaked gently as we moved. I don't look through you, I told her quietly. I see you. The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. Sophia's eyes searched mine, and I watched emotions play across her face: surprise, uncertainty, and something else, something warming. "I've noticed," she whispered. She whispered. The air around us seemed to change, becoming charged with possibility. I found myself leaning closer, drawn by something that felt bigger than simple attraction. Sophia didn't move away. We were close enough now that I could see flecks of gold in her green eyes, smell the faint traces of paint mixed with wine on her breath. Time seemed to slow, stretch like honey. We both knew we were approaching a line, one that once crossed would change everything between us. The string lights cast a soft glow around us, creating our own private world on this porch swing as twilight deepened into evening. My heart thundered in my chest as I held her gaze. Every point of near contact between us felt electric, our shoulders almost touching, our hands resting inches apart on the swing seat. The moment held us suspended, both afraid to break this delicate balance, both knowing we were about to. I leaned in, drawn by the magnetic pull between us, but Sophia's hand came to rest on my chest. Her touch was warm through my shirt, fingers splayed just above my heart. She wasn't pushing me away, but the gesture held me in place as surely as if she had. Her expression had turned serious. Those green eyes searching mine. "Wait," she said softly. I need you to be sure about what we're doing here." I stayed still, hyper-aware of her hand on my chest, of how close we still were. The string lights cast shifting shadows across her face as the porch swing moved slightly beneath us. "Sure about what?" I asked, my voice low. She took a breath, steadying herself. "Sure that this isn't just a whim, or a story you'll tell your friends later about the time you kissed the older woman down the street." Her words were careful, measured. "I can't be an experiment or a way to say you've been with someone older. If we do this, any of it, I need to know you see me as Sophia, not some idea or fantasy you've built up." The vulnerability in her voice made my chest ache beneath her palm. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my hands to capture hers where it rested against me. I held it carefully between both of mine, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. "I see. Sophia," I said, holding her gaze. "I see the woman who answered her door in a towel and somehow made me feel like I was the one underdressed, who laughs at herself for ambushing strangers but invited me in anyway." Her lips curved slightly at the memory, but she kept listening intently. "I see someone who has strong opinions about Rothko versus Pollock, and who probably has equally strong thoughts about 100 other things I want to learn about." I ran my thumb across her knuckles gently. "Who makes coffee so good, it makes my 20-year-old self nervous about the comparison." That earned a small laugh, but her eyes remained serious, studying my face for any hint of insincerity or casual interest. I continued, needing her to understand. "I see you, Sophia, not a number, not a category, just you. The way you get excited about paint colors and the way you move when you're thinking hard about something. How you make space feel warm just by being in it." She was so still now, barely breathing as she searched my expression. The string lights reflected in her eyes, making them sparkle like deep water. I could feel her pulse in her wrist where my fingers rested, quick and uncertain. "I know this isn't simple," I said softly. "I know there are complications and questions, and probably 100 reasons why we should be sensible right now. But when I look at you, I don't see complications. I just see Sophia. And that's enough for me to want to see where this goes. Whatever this is." Her fingers curled slightly against my chest, and I watched emotions flicker across her face. Hope, warring with caution, desire with doubt. The moment stretched between us, fragile as spun glass, waiting for her response. Something shifted in Sophia's expression as she held my gaze. Whatever she'd been searching for in my face, she seemed to find it. The tension in her shoulders softened, and her hand slid up from my chest to rest against my neck. Time seemed to slow, stretch, become honey-thick in the warm glow of the string lights. She leaned forward, closing the distance between us with deliberate grace. When her lips met mine, The kiss was soft, but certain, gentle pressure that felt like both a question and an answer. Her lips were warm, tasting faintly of the wine we'd shared. I caught the subtle scent of her shampoo, something light and clean that made me think of early spring mornings. I leaned in, chasing more of her warmth, but Sophia pulled back just as I did. The loss of contact was almost physical, like stepping from warmth into shadow. Her hand dropped from my neck, and though she remained close, I felt the shift in her energy. "Think about it," she said softly, her voice carrying that mix of warmth and caution I was coming to know so well. "Really think about what getting involved with me would mean." The porch swing creaked gently beneath us, and a car passed on the street, its headlights briefly painting moving shadows across her face. "If you're still sure tomorrow," she continued, "you know where I live." Her lips curved in a small smile, an echo of that first laugh we'd shared at her doorway. Sophia stood from the swing, and though nothing had technically ended, I felt the moment shift and break apart like sunlight through leaves. I rose to understanding this was my cue to leave. The wooden boards of her porch creaked softly under our feet as we walked to her front door. We paused there, in another doorway, like an echo of our first meeting. This time, Sophia didn't touch me, but her eyes held volumes, promises and warnings mixed together in those green depths. The string lights from the porch cast a soft glow around her hair, making it look like burnished copper. "Good night," she said, and it felt like she was saying so much more. "Good night, Sophia." I walked to my car with measured steps, feeling her presence behind me like a physical thing. The night air felt cool against my face, especially where her warmth had been moments before. As I slid behind the wheel, I could still feel the phantom pressure of her lips against mine. Could still taste the wine and possibility. Starting the engine, I knew I was already certain. The decision had probably been made the moment she'd opened her door and that towel, or during that first shared coffee, or somewhere in between the paint swatches and wine. But I understood why she needed me to be sure, really sure. Not just caught up in the moment or the romance of string lights and twilight confessions. I touched my lips briefly as I drove home. The ghost of her kiss lingering like a promise. Tomorrow felt very far away, but I knew where she lived, and I knew exactly what I wanted. The streets were quiet as I made my way home. Streetlights creating pools of yellow light at regular intervals. Each one felt like a marker, counting down the hours until I could return to Maple Street. Until I could tell Sophia that I'd thought about it, about her, about us. About everything that could go wrong and everything that could go so wonderfully right. I made it exactly halfway home before turning my car around. The digital clock on my dashboard read 9:15 when I pulled into the parking spot in front of Sophia's house. This time with 2 bags of takeout from Thai Palace balanced on my passenger seat. She'd mentioned it was her favorite during our paint swatch deliberations. Right between debating cerulean versus sage and sharing stories about terrible first apartments, by heart drummed against my ribs as I walked up her path for the second time that evening. The porch lights were still on, and I could see warm lamplight through her front windows. I shifted the bags to one arm and knocked. When Sophia opened the door, she was fully dressed this time, though still barefoot, I noticed with a smile. She wore soft-looking black pants and an oversized cream sweater that made her auburn hair glow copper in the porch light. Her expression moved from surprise to something more complex as she registered who stood at her door. "I thought about it," I said, holding up the takeout bags. "For exactly as long as it took to drive home and turn around." Sophia studied my face intently, and I let her look. I knew she was searching for something crucial. Doubt maybe, or the shine of novelty that would fade. Whatever she found in my expression must have satisfied her because she stepped back, opening the door wider. "You remembered Thai Palace," she said softly, taking one of the bags as I entered. We ended up at her kitchen island again, where this whole thing had started, with that first cup of coffee. The containers of pad thai steamed between us, and Sophia poured 2 glasses of wine. Neither of us touched our food right away. "I don't want to be your midlife crisis," I said, meeting her eyes directly. I need you to know that. Sophia's fingers traced the stem of her wineglass. And I don't want to be your coming-of-age story, she replied, her voice steady but vulnerable, or some fantasy about Mrs. Robinson that you'll outgrow. I'm 28, I reminded her gently. I've done my coming of age. I know who I am and what I want. And I'm 45, she countered, but without bitterness. Old enough to be well, you know what? I'm old enough to be. The pad thai grew cold between us as we talked, really. Talked. About her fears of being left for someone younger, like her ex-husband had done. About my worry that she might see me as too inexperienced to take seriously. We laid out our boundaries, our concerns, treating this fragile potential between us with the weight it deserved. Neither of us touched our food. Too focused on understanding each other, on making sure we were seeing the real person across the table and not just what we wanted to see. The wine in our glasses stayed largely untouched too, both of us wanting clarity for this conversation. The fortune cookies cracked open with promises neither of us read. Too caught up in the way the evening had shifted. Our fears had been named, examined, and set aside, not dismissed, but understood. The second bottle of wine sat half empty between us, warming as we talked about possibilities instead of problems. Sophia's fingers found mine across the kitchen island, and something in her touch felt different now, more certain, more deliberate. She stood, still holding my hand, and drew me toward her living room. The same space I'd waited in that first day now felt charged with new meaning. We settled onto her couch, close enough that our knees touched. Sophia's green eyes held mine, and I saw the same mix of desire and careful consideration I felt in my own chest. When I leaned in to kiss her this time, there was no stopping hand against my chest, just Sophia meeting me halfway. The kiss felt both new and familiar, like we'd been practicing for this moment without knowing it. Her lips were soft, tasting, faintly, of wine and possibility. We kissed like teenagers discovering what desire meant, but our hands stayed careful. Respectful, the restraint of adults who understood consequences. Between kisses, we shared more truths. I told her about watching her wash our coffee cups that first day, how she'd hummed something under her breath, swaying slightly. That's when I knew I'd come back, I confessed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Not just because you're beautiful though you are, but because you seemed so completely yourself in that moment. Sophia's fingers traced patterns on my palm as she made her own confession. I watched for you, she said quietly. These past 2 days, I kept finding reasons to check the street from my window. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but she smiled, the kind that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. I knew you'd come back. That admission changed something between us. The honesty made everything more solid, more real. Each kiss that followed carried the weight of that truth. Each touch acknowledged the choice we were making. The room had grown darker around us, the only light coming from a single lamp, and the streetlights filtering through her curtains. Sophia pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, her hand warm against my cheek. Stay, she said softly. Not a question, not a casual invitation. Stay carried the weight of tomorrow, of next week, of choosing this, despite all the reasons we'd listed not to. I covered her hand with mine, turning to press a kiss to her palm. Yes, I answered, understanding exactly what she was offering, what we were both choosing. Sophia rose from the couch, her hand extended toward me. The gesture held Waitan, invitation, a choice, a beginning. I took her hand without hesitation, our fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. She led me through her house, past the dining room where patches of color marked our afternoon's work. The hardwood floors whispered beneath our feet until we reached the stairs. Each step creaked softly as we ascended, like the house itself was holding its breath. At her bedroom doorway, Sophia turned to face me. Moonlight from the hall window caught in her hair, silvering the auburn strands. Her expression held that remarkable mix of vulnerability and certainty I was coming to recognize. The look that said she knew exactly what she wanted, but still marveled that she could have it. Are you sure? She asked one more time. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but I heard the layers in her question. She wasn't asking about right now, about desire or attraction. She was asking about tomorrow morning, about the day after, about all the complications we'd discussed over cooling Thai food. I drew her closer, one hand settling at the small of her back, the other cradling her face. "I'm sure about this morning," I told her, watching her eyes search mine. "I'm sure about tomorrow morning. I'm sure about every morning we're brave enough to claim." The tension in her shoulders eased at my words. She lifted onto her toes, her fingers threading through my hair as she pulled me down into a kiss that felt different from all our others. Deeper, certain, full of promise. My arms tightened around her waist, drawing her closer until I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. "I haven't done this in so long," she whispered between kisses. A confession that held equal parts nervousness and trust. "Any of this." I pressed my forehead to hers, sharing the same breath. "We'll figure it out together," I promised. Meaning so much more than just this moment. Sophia's smile was soft, intimate, a private expression I'd never seen before. She stepped backward through her doorway, drawing me with her. The door closed behind us with a quiet click that felt significant, like we were shutting out doubts and hesitation, opening the door to something entirely new. In that moment, standing in her moonlit bedroom, I understood that some wrong turns lead exactly where you're meant to be. Sunlight woke me, streaming through unfamiliar windows in ribbons of gold. For a moment, I lay still, letting my eyes adjust to the warm glow filling Sophia's bedroom. The space beside me was empty but still held the warmth of her presence. I found her standing by the window, wrapped in my white t-shirt that barely reached. She cradled a coffee mug in both hands, steam curling up past her face as she gazed out at her new neighborhood. The morning light caught in her auburn hair, turning the edges to fire. And I understood, suddenly, why Renaissance painters were so obsessed with capturing that particular kind of radiance. You know those rare moments when time seems to slow down, when you want to memorize every detail? This was one of those. The way the sun painted everything in honey tones. The gentle rise and fall of her breathing. The peaceful set of her shoulders. It felt important somehow, like a snapshot of something I'd want to remember years from now. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I shifted, and Sophia turned toward me. Backlit by the sunrise, she looked ethereal, but her smile was wonderfully human, that same surprised delight I'd seen when she'd first opened her door to me. Equal parts mischief and warmth. "Still the right house?" she asked. The question carried more weight than its playful delivery suggested. We both knew she wasn't just asking about the address anymore. I crossed the room to her, drawn by something that felt both new and familiar. My arm slipped around her waist from behind, and she settled back against my chest like she belonged. There, the scent of coffee mingled with her shampoo, something citrusy and fresh that I was already starting to associate with comfort. Against the warm skin of her neck, I murmured, "Getting more right all the time." I felt, rather than saw her smile widen. We stood there together, watching the neighborhood wake up through her window. A sprinkler started up across the street, creating tiny rainbows in the morning light. Someone walked their dog past the house, lifting a hand to wave at another early riser. Small moments of ordinary life unfolding while we held our own extraordinary moment close. Sophia's body was warm against mine, her fingers laced through the hand I had resting on her stomach. The coffee in her mug slowly cooled, forgotten in the simple pleasure of standing together, watching the world turn gold. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones you don't plan. Like taking a wrong turn and finding yourself exactly where you need to be. Sophia turned in my arms, carefully setting her coffee mug on the wide windowsill. Morning light caught the auburn highlights in her hair as she reached up to touch my face, her thumb tracing along my jawline with a gentleness that made my breath catch. "I don't know what happens next," she said softly, her green eyes searching mine. "I haven't figured out how to do any of this. Being with someone younger, starting something new when I thought." She shook her head, letting out a small breath. "When I thought that part of my life was finished, I caught her hand where it rested against my cheek, turning to press a kiss to her palm. We don't need all the answers today, I told her. We can take it moment by moment, morning by morning. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, but I could see there was more. She bit her lower lip, a gesture I was learning meant she was working up to something. My daughter will be home for Thanksgiving break in 3 weeks, she said finally. I smiled, trying to keep my voice light, despite the flutter in my chest. Well, that gives us 3 weeks to figure out how to introduce me. I pretended to consider it carefully. What sounds better, the friend who's good with directions, or the guy who gets lost in all the right places? That did it, she laughed, that same genuine surprised sound that had first drawn me in. The years fell away from her face when she laughed like that. Not because she looked younger, but because she looked purely, completely herself. She rose up on her toes to kiss me, and I tasted coffee, and something sweeter possibility, maybe, or hope. Her fingers curled into the hair at the nape of my neck as I pulled her closer. The soft cotton of my t-shirt bunching under my hands at her waist. Outside, Maple Street was waking up properly now. A dog barked somewhere down the block, followed by another answering. Cars started up in driveways, heading out for Sunday morning errands or adventures. The normal rhythm of life continued beyond these walls, beyond this moment. But here in Sophia's bedroom, we were writing our own story. One that had started with a wrong address and a woman in a towel, and was continuing with trust, desire, and the brave choice to see where this unexpected path might lead. No maps, no guarantees, just to people choosing each other in the morning light. Moment by moment, morning by morning. The world outside could wait a little longer, if tonight's ending felt right. Hit subscribe and share this with one person who needs a gentle story. I'll be here tomorrow with another